This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. The days are getting longer, but that doesn't make a huge difference to me. I'm still gonna plan to get to bed early, stay up until 1 a.m. watching Netflix, and then complain about my alarm going off the same time it always does. Here's what we got for y'all. President Biden ran on the promise of police reform during a national reckoning over police brutality. We'll tell you how he plans to address issues in policing. Plus, the UK coronavirus variant has mutated again. We spoke to a doctor across the pond to explain how this more transmissible variant puts added pressure on the nation's healthcare system. But first, here's what you need to know right now. It's no secret the vaccine rollout across the US has not gone super smoothly. For one, there just aren't enough doses to go around. Moderna hopes to help with that problem by increasing the number of doses in its vials from 10 to 15. The proposal is part of a push from the Biden administration to try and speed up the distribution. But like most things these days, it's not quite so simple. The industry standard has been 10 doses per vial. Federal regulators have concerns that extra punctures in the vial could increase the risk of bacteria contaminating the vaccine. The Food and Drug Administration would need to approve Moderna's proposal. Another potential factor in this slow rollout, the fact that extra doses are being saved rather than rushed out right away. On Monday, a senior advisor of Biden's COVID response team said this:
"We believe that some healthcare providers are regularly holding back doses that are intended as first doses and instead keeping them in reserve for second doses for patients."
The Biden administration wants all the available doses distributed immediately, but it's a tricky situation considering that many Americans are having trouble securing their appointment for the second shot as more places report shortages. According to the head of the CDC, the second dose could be given up to 6 or even 7 weeks after the first, but that should be reserved for rare circumstances. Generally, the guidance is 3 to 4 weeks between doses for major vaccines. Amazon announced today that founder Jeff Bezos is stepping down from a CEO role and moving to the role of executive chair, handing over the reins of his e-commerce giant. In a statement, Bezos didn't say much about his role change, other than claiming Amazon is more inventive than ever, making this the best time for a transition. It's also taking in more money than ever. In a recent earnings report, the company announced its first ever $100 billion quarter. Amazon Web Service CEO Andy Jassy will replace Bezos later this year. Worth noting, by the way, Bezos has added $70 billion to his net worth in just the past year. House Democrats say former President Donald Trump aimed violent supporters at the Capitol, quote, like a loaded cannon on January 6th. That line comes from the 80-page pretrial brief filed for Trump's upcoming impeachment trial in the Senate. The House members argue that Trump's baseless claims of a rigged election and his refusal to accept the results launched a pressure campaign aimed at election officials, the Justice Department, and Congress. Trump faces one article of impeachment, incitement of insurrection. His Senate trial is set to start on February 9th. While he's no longer in office, Democrats argued Trump needs to be charged on principle to hold him accountable and to open up the option of barring him from ever running for any sort of elected office again. Republican senators have signaled that they plan to acquit the former president again. Last week, 45 Republicans in the Senate, including Mitch McConnell, voted to dismiss the trial. That's almost half the Senate trying to throw out the trial before it ever gets off the ground. Keep in mind, the Senate would need a 2/3 majority to convict the former president. President Joe Biden signed an executive order extending federal protections for renters through March, but housing advocates say it doesn't go far enough. The CDC order says renters have to go through a series of steps showing they've exhausted all resources and prove they would essentially become homeless if evicted. Housing advocates say the order has too many loopholes and leaves it up to each state to interpret it. Since the beginning of the pandemic last year, landlords filed more than 240,000 evictions across 27 cities in 5 states, according to the eviction lab at Princeton University. Congress did set aside $25 billion in the last stimulus package for struggling renters, but getting that assistance to people who need it has not been so easy.
It is unfortunately and unnecessarily restrictive. It's requiring localities to have really burdensome documentation requirements, including some that could be do long-term harm to tenants, like requiring eviction notices in hand before people can receive those funds.
During last year's season of racial justice demonstrations following the death of George Floyd, then presidential candidate Joe Biden said he would make police reform a priority once in office. Now that he's been sworn in, how exactly does President Biden plan to address policing issues? Newsy's Shira Tarlow explains.
Joe Biden was sworn in amid a national reckoning over police brutality and racial injustice, and he's vowed to bring about change.
Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world.
The Biden administration plans to launch a police commission similar to the White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing that was established in 2015 by President Barack Obama in the wake of the fatal shooting of Michael Brown.
The conversation about policing in America has evolved since George Floyd's tragic death last summer and that of Breonna Taylor.
Lori Robinson co-chaired Obama's task force and co-authored its final report on how to improve relations between law enforcement and the communities they police. The report still serves as one of Washington's most exhaustive playbooks for police reform and a model for how a president can spearhead change.
What I'm going to do as President of the United States is call together an entire group of people at the White House, well, everything from the civil rights groups to the police officers, the police chiefs, and we're going to work this out.
But bringing everyone to the table won't be simple. On the left, some are calling for defunding or completely abolishing the police. On the right, some believe any attempt to criticize, modify, or reform policing would threaten public safety.
The country is still largely divided on how they view the police.
Dolores Jones Brown has spent over 10 years teaching sworn NYPD officers how to work effectively with multicultural populations and testified before Obama's policing task force. Since 2013, the number of people who have died at the hands of police has remained relatively steady, despite some reforms, with Black people 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people, almost every time the officer wasn't charged with a crime. The numbers have left some feeling hopeless that change can come from the White House, especially since most American policing is carried out at the state and local level.
The people who are policed the most, who tend to be people of color and low-income people, those individuals are looking for President Biden to come up with accountability measures.
Some clues about how the president will tackle policing issues can be found in an op-ed he published in June. In the piece, the president proposed giving $300 million to police departments so they can carry out reforms, like adopting a national use of force standard, buying body cameras, and recruiting more diverse police officers. Biden's campaign also proposed partnering police departments with behavioral health experts, reinvigorating community policing efforts, and emboldening the Justice Department to probe police misconduct using consent decrees and pattern or practice investigations, a reversal from the Trump administration. The families of Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor were among those who attended the president's inauguration, and they've called on the president to hold police accountable.
We demand abolishing immunity of the police being able not to be charged for what they do. We demand that off the top.
Shira Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
Is $1 billion too much to pay for booze? Asking for a friend. Here on ITL, we do not condone drinking and driving, but driving some drink is all good with us. Here's what's trending. Uber has announced they will be buying alcohol delivery service Drizzly for $1.1 billion and just in time for wet February. Once that purchase is complete, users will be able to find Drizzly's marketplace within the Uber Eats app. If you already have the Drizzly app, don't worry, Uber is planning to keep the standalone app as well. And the deal between the two is expected to close during the first half of this year. Uber Eats and Drizzly have both seen a lot of growth during the pandemic since more and more people have been eating and imbibing at home. Good for y'all. You know, Drizzly has been called the Amazon for liquor because of its 1-hour delivery time, so let's see if I can get a cold one here by the time the show is over. Russia's Sputnik V vaccine is trending because of newly released data that gives some insight on its effectiveness. Sputnik V's phase 3 trial results showed that the vaccine is nearly 92% effective against symptomatic COVID-19 and 100% effective against severe and moderate COVID-19 cases. The Sputnik V is a 2-dose vaccine with the doses administered 21 days apart, a similar timeline to the process of administering the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Sputnik V has some key differences from Pfizer and Moderna though. It's an adenoviral vaccine. One advantage of this type of vaccine is that they don't need to be stored in and transported at extremely cold temperatures. There's still more research to be done, and despite the criticism for an early rollout, Sputnik V has already been administered to 2 million people worldwide. College football is back. Well, the virtual version with a 0% chance of COVID transmission and CTE. Electronic Arts announced they are rebooting the college football series, which had folks wilding online, and here's why. The last college football video game from EA, titled NCAA Football 14, sold 1.5 million copies. The company then shelved the series in 2013 because of a legal dispute over using the likenesses of college players in the game. To make the game happen, EA partnered with the college licensing company to get the look and feel and playbooks and uniforms of more than 100 schools in the game. Also, this go round, they're nixing NCAA in the title. Right now, the game is moving forward without rosters that include names or likenesses of players, but legislation could change whether athletes can sell their rights in the future. EA didn't say when the game is dropping, but that's not going to stop me from preemptively snagging a college football visor and a Gatorade cooler for at-home use. The UK coronavirus variant, which is more transmissible, has put immense pressure on the country's already strained health system, and scientists say it's mutated again. In this next story, we spoke to a doctor who gives us an update on what the fight against this variant looks like on the ground and how it's affecting UK residents.
In Britain, a new strain of coronavirus, first detected in southern England in September, is now the most common form of COVID-19 in the UK. It's known as B117, and early evidence suggests it's more deadly.
The numbers shot through the roof at the beginning.
Dr. Katrina Kristalis saw firsthand the rapid spread of the new variant in December, as death rates surged after Christmas.
If you've got a virus that is 70% more transmissible than a previous virus that was very transmissible and you're not in lockdown, it's going to spread, and that's what happened.
More than 100,000 people in the UK have now died from coronavirus, more than any other European country. But the deadliest month was January.
Here we go again.
Critics of Boris Johnson say he could have acted sooner in December. The leader of the Labour Party called for a strict lockdown to prevent people travelling to visit relatives for Christmas, something Boris Johnson mocked.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish he'd have the guts just to say what he really wants to do, which is to cancel the plans people have made and cancel Christmas.
For Dr. Peter Openshaw, one of the UK's preeminent immunologists, the biggest lesson to be learnt about the B117 variant is greater caution is required.
In all parts of the country where this variant has become common, there's been an increase in number of hospital admissions, increase in number of cases, and it's become increasingly difficult to control the viral spread by the sort of measures that did work before.
Here in the laboratory at London Metropolitan University, Dr. Gary McLean and his team are studying how viruses evolve. Dr. McLean says mutations like B117 arise when viruses are allowed to spread.
We knew that coronaviruses could mutate. We knew they could change their genome. What we weren't expecting is these ones to appear that gave it a huge advantage in transmission.
The UK is in the middle of a nationwide lockdown, and it's helping to push down the levels of the B117 variant in the community. But ultimately, many believe it's the government's failure to act sooner that has led to the rapid spread of this particular version of coronavirus.
For Lobby Akinola, whose father died in April during the first wave, Boris Johnson's decision to lock down later than much of Western Europe was a mistake.
I think in December we saw the government repeat the mistakes that it made in the first wave of the pandemic. It affects me personally because I can't help but think, would my dad still be here had we locked down just a couple of weeks earlier?
Early evidence shows the vaccine works on the B117 variant. Experts in this country say restrictions should remain in place until the entire country has been vaccinated. For Newsy, I'm Luke Hanrahan in London.
Quick PSA, wear a mask, wash your hands, and keep folks out of your personal space by any means necessary. At the tail end of last month, Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican representing Missouri, wrote an op-ed for the New York Post where he railed against cancel culture and the perceived censorship of conservatives on social media. He's done this for years, and he's not alone in this view. But a new report challenges claims that he and others like him are being muzzled online. Newsy's Tyler Atkinson explains.
For years, conservatives have insisted that social media companies like Facebook and Twitter are censoring their ideas. A new report directly contradicts that claim, saying the sites aren't systematically biased against conservatives.
This accusation is yet another false conspiracy theory.
Paul Barrett authored the report from New York University.
It's a way of explaining the world that you should understand what you see on Facebook or Twitter as being shaped by this animus against the political right.
Twitter and Facebook's recent moves to suspend former President Donald Trump from their platforms have restoked the flames around these conservative attacks. But the report found there's not enough strong empirical data to support the claims, and that anecdotal examples of this bias, quote, crumble under close examination.
Both Twitter and Facebook had trouble explaining themselves clearly as to why they were doing what they were doing. And in the course of failing to explain what their thinking really was, they opened themselves up to the allegation that this was just another form of partisan politics, and the social media companies are censoring the right.
The report also shows how much prominence conservative politicians and influencers have on social media. Donald Trump dominated Facebook engagement in the 2 months ahead of the election. The former president and Joe Biden's Facebook pages together generated 307 million interactions. Trump was responsible for 87% of the activity. Conservatives' claims of unfair treatment have also included losing followers with seemingly no explanation from the platforms as to why. But researchers think that the exodus of QAnon from mainstream platforms may be a factor.
They thought a number of figures, all the way up to Pence, was betraying them, and obviously McConnell and Lindsey Graham. So I think a number of them are no longer invested in their GOP leaders. And so they're moving away. They're listening to other people.
The researchers want social media companies to be more transparent about their content moderation decisions. They also want the Biden administration to work with Congress to overhaul things like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and create a new digital regulatory agency to enforce those rules. Tyler Atkinson, Newsy, Chicago.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop, but only after the Groundhog Day tweets are over. I'm not coming back until that mess is finished. Registration for spring sports is happening all over the country, but we're still in a pandemic and variants have continued to spread through community transmission. With that being said, the American Academy of Pediatrics is offering up this tidbit of advice to keep everyone safe. Take it outside and keep it outside. National reporter Stephanie Stone explains.
I want kids to play sports. I want kids to exercise, but we do still need to do it safely. And that may depend on where around the country you're located.
Dr. Tanya Altman, a Los Angeles area pediatrician and spokesperson for the American Academy of Pediatrics, has been and continues to be an advocate of keeping kids in school and keeping kids active. But she's also the first to say it has got to be safe.
We know anything outdoors is safer than indoors. So ideally, your kid would be playing a sport outdoors, still distanced, separated from their teammates. So that might mean they're just doing conditioning and not yet competition. And they're wearing masks as long as it's a sport where you can wear masks.
In most areas of the country, the transmission rate is just too high to play inside. But that certainly takes a lot of activities off the table.
If you have to do a sport indoors, it really needs to be non-contact, distance, wearing a mask, not very many spectators in the room, and following all the precautions that we can. Keeping that team together in a cohort, maybe even testing them before.
If your son or daughter is into wrestling or something that's a close contact sport, you may have a little bit more time to wait than somebody that's playing softball or baseball or volleyball, sports that we can kind of control a little bit better and make, be safe.
That's John Ang, the executive director of the National Alliance for Youth Sports. The organization has been helping kids play since 1981.
The idea was to work with the recreation departments and come up with a program to train them in the basic fundamentals of a sport, but more importantly, to train the parents of what they're going to get to deal with. 2020
hit them hard as program after program was canceled. Now they're trying to help everyone move forward in 2021.
From a national organization perspective, we're doing basically what we can do, which is to follow the CDC guidelines. Everybody is calling us on a weekly basis, our organization, saying, can we start up? And of course, we can't say, yes, you can start up. We're doing exactly what they're saying.
His best advice is to follow what's happening in your local community, your local government, which is ultimately taking direction from the CDC.
You can do team conditioning spaced out, outdoors. We might not be able to do competition sports for certain sports this year that have to be indoors and the kids have to be close to each other, and that's okay. Just keep exercising, doing your conditioning, and we will get back there as we all work together to decrease the numbers in our country.
Well, that's disappointing for some. It's a reminder that we won't get infection rates down unless we all agree to level the playing field by playing it safe. I'm Stephanie Stone, reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. More top stories are headed your way right now.